we're honored to have actually Brett today with us. He has been actually around for even longer actually than we have been. He's currently the managing director of Techstars Farm to Fork Accelerator, which is a program that they've built in partnership also with Cargill and Ecolab. And is also the founder and managing partner of Bread and Butter Ventures. I've got actually a pretty long blurb that introduces Brett, exactly, but I think it's good enough. And then I like to actually further elaborate on that. But maybe, Brett, if you can start by introducing yourself for everyone who doesn't know what you do and who you are. And tell us also a little bit more about the program that you actually head up, as well as Bread and Butter Ventures.
Yeah. Again, my name is Brett Brohl. I'm headquartered in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. I've been here for about 11 years, which is a great location for food and food tech and food startups in general. We have just a tremendous number of Fortune 500s that play in food and in the food space up here. So it's a really good place. Plus, we have all the farms and kind of all the ingredients in Minnesota, which is why I'm here. For the last 5 years, I've been on the investing side of the business. So I run the Techstars Farm to Fork Accelerator. Prior to that, I helped build the Techstars retail program, which is focused on the retail side of things, and we work with Target on that. We invest in food tech through Techstars Farm to Fork. So it's anything from on-farm, ag tech, but also all the way to retail tech. How do you get food into the hands of consumers? It's the messy middle, supply chain, manufacturing, logistics. So it truly is the entire food supply chain from on-farm and all the way to, the consumption. Our focus is primarily in the digital side of it. So, I always say tech-enabled companies. So we're not investing in new consumer products in our program. We are more focused on software, robotics, hardware, new innovations in the food space that are coming from that side of the table. Prior to working with Techstars, I was an entrepreneur for a long time. So I've built and sold a couple companies as an entrepreneur, as CEO. I also have taken a company and run it right into a brick wall and failed pretty tremendously. Happy to talk about any of those experiences. And in addition to the Techstars piece, I also actively run the Bread and Butter Ventures, which we just rebranded. We brought on a new partner, Mary Grove, and Bread and Butter Ventures is a traditional venture capital fund. We invest at early stage, seed stage companies. And one of our core verticals is food tech investing, right in line with the types of companies we invest in at the Techstars program. So traditional venture capital, investing pre-seed, seed stage companies. And again, one of my core focus areas with that venture fund is food tech.
Oh, wow. So I guess you wear multiple hats, or you've been wearing multiple hats throughout your career as an investor, as an entrepreneur, as a program manager of a corporate-backed program, and now also as the latest, I guess, venture is actually as an investor who runs a VC fund.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And you've been actually working primarily in the US, correct? So you guys also go ahead.
Yeah, the majority of our investments have been either US-based companies or companies that have an interest in the US market. And so through the Techstars program, about 30% of our companies have been international companies. So we've invested in companies from Israel, India, Canada, Hong Kong, where a couple of the others from. So we do look internationally. We've had 19 companies. 6 of the 19 companies have been international so far. So we do look internationally as well.
That's fantastic. And you started, can you give us a little bit of also the genesis of, maybe we can start from Techstars, because that's, I guess, where most of our audience as well is interested in the food tech side of it. And then we can, I'm actually really keen to also learn more about Bread and Butter Ventures and how do you actually evaluate, companies in there. But just to bring everyone up to speed with the program, can you give us a little bit of the genesis of how the company, how the program actually came about, and how long have you been running it, and actually what are maybe your biggest learnings? Also working with large corporates of the likes of Cargill, who I'm sure at the beginning it was probably kind of a new thing for them, but now you are a lot farther down in the journey. So if you can share maybe high level, what have you learned also personally and professionally?
Yeah, like my food journey actually started through my wife. So she's been at big enterprise food companies her entire career. And so she was at, the reason we moved to Minnesota was for her job at General Mills. And so she's been, she started at General Mills and has since left, and she's at Schwann's Food Company now, another giant food company. And so that really is what piqued my interest. In 2016, I had a program, opportunity to run a program with Land O'Lakes in partnership with Land O'Lakes. That was a Techstars program in partnership with Land O'Lakes called Startup Next, and it was a beta program. On the Techstars side, we decided not to continue to run that style of a program. But I was super interested in food tech. 2015, 2016, it was still, we're still early days in food tech investing, frankly, right? The Climate Corp acquisition by Monsanto in 2011 was kind of the first, I call that the beginning of the modern era of food tech investment. It was the first, billion-dollar unicorn type exit in food tech in quite some time. And it opened a lot of venture capitalist eyes. And so that was really where my interest got piqued. And I actually was already a part of Techstars through the retail program, and basically said, hey, we need to have a food tech accelerator. We need to be in the food tech space. This is a really important space to be investing in. There's a ton of amazing opportunity. And so I had the opportunity to go out and build the Farm to Fork Accelerator and bring on partners, in the community here to help us accomplish that. And so I was able to bring on Cargill and Ecolab as partners for the program to help us build it and to help us scale. And both of them were super excited when I brought it to them. And we're talking from C-suite down. So we have buy-in from the C-level executives, the CEOs, both actively participate in our program. If you've watched any of our demo days, Doug Baker and David McLennan at Ecolab and Cargill respectively are at both demo days. They get up on stage and talk. They meet with all of our companies, and it comes down through the entirety of the organization. And that type of buy-in has been phenomenal for us, and it really has given us access to a lot of the resources that those enterprises have that startups just don't. So that's the genesis of it. It was I've just been interested in the food tech space. I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for founders, for corporations, for everybody, and frankly, we need it, right? We need innovation in food, and so not only is there a great opportunity for financial return, but if we don't do it, we're all screwed.
It's actually as simple as that, isn't it, Brett? We're solving one of the biggest, or we're addressing, for that matter, one of the biggest, needs of the Maslow pyramid. So we either do it or we're gonna die somehow of starve. So that's awesome, and thanks, Brett, for also shedding some light on the genesis of actually how this whole thing came about. Now, to deep dive into that, as you actually work with large companies, the likes of Cargill and Ecolab, to help them innovate by actually working elbow by elbow with entrepreneurs, what do you see are the biggest actually challenges as well as opportunities for these two parties to work together?
Yeah, I'll start with there's some obvious challenges, right? Anytime a humongous enterprise, you're talking, tens of thousands of employees, enterprises that we're working with, 100,000 plus in, certainly in Cargill's case. And so just giant enterprises. And so it's hard for internal employees at those enterprises to navigate their own enterprise, let alone a startup trying to come in, trying to navigate that enterprise. And so that's a tremendous challenge. The other one that everybody talks about with corporate innovation is the short-term incentive around P&Ls and profit and loss statements versus the amount of time early-stage startups traditionally take to pay off. And in most enterprises, in most giant enterprises, you need business unit sign-off. So you need one of the core business units. You need them to sign off on an investment, on a pilot, on a POC, on any cash going out to a startup. You need that business unit to sign off on it and agree to it. And they're incented by how their P&L is doing, right? That's how they're graded. That's how they're judged. And the payoff for doing a pilot or doing a POC with that startup isn't always immediate. And so, if you're a manager of a business and you know that your incentive structure is based around how you're going to do this year, and you might not even be in that job in 2 years, and the payoff might be in 3 years or 4 years. It is harder to, flip that switch and make that decision. And so I think that's the traditional that a lot of people talk about, right? The difficulty that a lot of people talk about that you really have to overcome when you're starting to work with an enterprise. That's the thing that you have to overcome, in my opinion, the big thing.
What about opportunities then? Because
and I mean, so I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for the two to work together, right? But I do think that it has to be the corporations that I see that do it well, they go all in, right? It is if you truly want to think innovatively and work with early stage startups and early stage companies, you need to do it wholeheartedly and commit to it for a long period of time. Otherwise, you are going to get a year into it and say, hey, we didn't get these returns, and you're going to kill it, and you're going to have wasted a ton of money as an enterprise. And I honestly believe that for some enterprises, like innovation through acquisition might be your best strategy, right? And so it might be better to, if your competitive advantage as an enterprise is your balance sheet, perhaps it's better to wait till a company's doing $100 million in revenue and then just pay a little bit of a premium, or pay a premium at that point. And that's okay, especially if you don't want to truly, put your head down and commit to a long-term, innovation process on working with early stage startups. What I would say is that if you are a big enterprise, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for you to learn from startups and from the founders that are building companies, how they think, how they move, how they are agile. It can be one of the reasons our partners do this, and they talk about this publicly, is they provide a ton of mentors for our program. And if you talk to Justin Kershaw, who's the CIO at Cargill, or Doug Baker at Ecolab, or some of the other senior level executives, they're like, the feedback we get from our mentors is we learned way more from those founders than they learned from us, right? And it's that how do you bring some of the agility and some of that, the way that founders can move quick and pivot quickly and test quickly to the enterprise. And so I think there's a tremendous amount that that big corporations can learn from working directly with entrepreneurs outside of the tech itself, right? That's not even like talking about what the product is, right? Like, there's a lot of great startups out there that have tremendous software, that have tremendous something, that have a tremendous thing that can also make the business more efficient if it works. And so outside of that value prop, you also have the value of, hey, it's going to take us out of our comfort zone, make us think a little bit differently. And anytime I think you're forced out of your comfort zone to think differently, it is a truly beneficial thing for leaders at these enterprises. It will make you better as a corporation. And I think we've seen that certainly come to fruition through all the programs and things I do with our corporate partners. On the other side of it, the startup side, again, like the obvious thing is we're going to do a pilot or we're going to get a commercial contract. You're going to pay us money, right? Like that's the obvious, potential benefit for a startup. And the ramifications of that, which are easier to fundraise, et cetera, et cetera. However, just think about all of the information and expertise these giant enterprises have. People that are running these businesses or are working on something specific within a business, they don't even know how much they know. That's another piece of feedback we get is we'll have founders go into a room and meet with, somebody that's running a P&L, and they'll walk out of the room and their eyes are like, holy cow, like I never expected, like the amount of knowledge that I just got from that one person in 20 minutes would have taken me a year to learn on my own. And so it's not just the dollars that adds value for a startup. It is the knowledge base, the data, there's a ton of other things. They also obviously are running big businesses, so you can see how they run those businesses. And not all strategy that works for a corporation works for a startup, and vice versa, right? You have to be careful there. But there's a ton of value outside of just the contract value that a startup can get from big enterprises. And with the Techstars program, that's really what we try and help do, is bridge that gap and coach both sides on how to get the most out of it outside of the potential for contracts and POCs.
That's fantastic, Brett. And again, I think it piggybacks on what you were describing earlier about, there are some clear, I guess, incentives, right, on both ends to work together. But what we also call like kind of human osmosis, right, which is the learning process between entrepreneurs and corporate executives is oftentimes really the biggest hidden sort of value that both parties actually take from even exploring, these collaboration opportunities. Is very reassuring to hear also from you that you've been around, this space for a while, that actually some of your corporate partners as well now see that as the kind of primary driver for even, initiating some of these programs, right? That's awesome. Just to take a step back and make sure that everyone, is on the same page as far as knowledge, also is concerned. Can you actually define maybe the differences between corporate venturing as, setting up an entity that does actually venturing and is backed by a corporate versus a program like the one that you run, right? I guess there are different objectives, but just again to kind of level up, the knowledge here.
Yeah, and so most organizations now, you're seeing in the food space a ton of the big enterprise foods are spinning up corporate venture arms, and those are typically set up to invest directly into startups. And almost always, those startups have to have business unit alignment. And there are very few corporate venture arms that do blue sky venture investing. There are some that do blue sky venture investing, but the majority of them out there, you need to have alignment where they can see where they can potentially one day plug you in, and hopefully that plug-in is in the near term. And so that's it's a venture arm. They're going to invest dollars into a startup. And then there's also oftentimes innovation teams, and they call it a variety of different things in different organizations that are actively working to engage with startups and bring them in for pilots or POCs. And those are called different things all over the place. With Cargill and Ecolab, the way we plug in, we actually do invest in the companies that come through our program, but we make the investment at the Techstars level. It's not our corporate partners making that investment. And then we bring them in, and then we manage and create engagement between the two parties. And we have had our corporate partners invest in companies that have come through our program after the program at the end of it through their investment vehicles. But so it's not that doesn't happen, but there's two different pieces to it.
So effectively, with the program, is not mandatory to invest as a corporate, whereas when they actually set up a corporate venture fund, their primary objective is actually to investing in businesses that might be complementary with their own, or just, in interesting technologies that they think can be replaced, maybe the core business, or they actually might be functional effectively for running the business. Fantastic. It was just to, again, bringing everyone up to speed as we then deep dive into that, and also how this whole kind of space is going to look like in the post-COVID era, right? But just before I get into that, as you actually see both sides of the food tech startup world, right, from your roles as an MD of the program, as well as actually a venture capitalist for Bread and Butter Ventures. And having helped, a bunch of actually companies in the food tech space, including actually some of the Food Tech 500 winners, like HearthSense and actually Spoonshot, which I know that they've joined your program. Did you witness any change in the past, let's say, 5 years in the way actually large businesses approach open innovation? And if so, can you provide any examples of also successful collaborations that have been established through your program?
So there's been a tremendous number of pilots and POCs between our partners and actually other big enterprises and the companies that have come through our program. Spoonshot is one of those examples who did and continues to work with some major enterprises, including Cargill, as they came through our program. And so that is a very obvious example of it. I think the big trend in the last 5 years is just the interest in the food tech space, like holistically. In 2015, there just wasn't, big enterprise food wasn't really thinking about this as much. Just the number of corporate venture arms, the number of innovation teams, the number of calls I get from pretty much every major food enterprise out there about, hey, tell us about your program, what are you doing? So I think that the amount of interest has risen tremendously over the last 5 years, and I think that some of it's just poking and seeing what's happening. I think that the adoption, and we can talk about this more, and I think that with COVID, that is going to accelerate things, certainly. So I don't know if I answered your question well there, but
is in terms of, I was actually curious about kind of the trends, the behavior, if you will, on how corporates actually approach open innovation.
Yeah, and I mean, like, so you're seeing at a lot of these big corporations, you're seeing innovation teams getting stood up, right? Which they never, external innovation teams getting stood up. Cargill, another great example of Cargill is they're doing open source contributions to blockchain around food traceability right now, and they're big proponents of open source at the blockchain level, and they believe that, I don't want to speak for them, but you can check out some of their efforts, what they've done there. You're seeing collaboration amongst other big food enterprises to work on different types of innovation, largely around food safety and traceability are like two things that have kind of coalesced. Again, with COVID, you're seeing some collaboration around food waste and how do you like manage and mitigate some food waste. So you're seeing some collaboration and openness around that. You're seeing just teams created to work with startups. You're seeing, through like things like Techstars, but like also like Plug and Play and some of the other big players that work with startups and have been experts in the startup space for a long time, are also now working in opening food or food tech verticals in what they do. And so, and that's being driven by demand, right? That's being driven by market demand from major enterprises. Major enterprises want to have access. They want to understand what's going on at the earlier stages of their businesses. I think that a lot of them publicly talk about, we recognize that if we don't innovate, we will be disrupted ourselves now. And so, I mean, there's actionable steps you're seeing you're seeing big enterprises take.
Yeah, that's great. And out of interest, I know that, there is a gazillion, I guess, examples out there, through your program, through some of the other players that you've mentioned. If you were to pick one example of a successful collaboration between a corporate and a startup in the agri-food tech space that you think is so kind of obvious, the benefits that they could both get, which one would be? If there is one favorite, I don't know if you can, talk about the companies, but maybe, we can even just leave it at the kind of high level, of what.
One of my favorites is Techstars, right? I mean, and the collaboration that we have with Cargill and Ecolab. And so this probably isn't what you're expecting, but like Techstars isn't, we're still, we consider ourselves a startup. We raised the Series B, not too long ago, and publicly announced our Series B. And it's a great example of where I think it's just such an obvious partnership that makes an incredible amount of sense, where, we are experts at helping early stage startups succeed. Almost 90% of the companies that come through a Techstars program are either still active or have been acquired. And we've had over 2,000 companies come through Techstars programs. We're really good at helping entrepreneurs and helping entrepreneurs build significant businesses. Outside of like my little bubble, we weren't experts in the food tech space, right? And so partnering with Cargill and Ecolab is a tremendous way for us to bring a tremendous amount of knowledge and expertise in this vertical to the startups that we're investing in that are active in food tech. And so, and they, Cargill and Ecolab want to be active in early stage, but they're not experts in the early stage stuff, right? And so, you combine those two forces, and it's like, it felt like a no-brainer to me, and I think that everybody that's been involved, it's felt like a no-brainer too as well. So, that's not one of the startups that came through, but I think using Techstars as an example is a great one, and it's one that I know I can talk about without getting in trouble.
Yeah, which is great. And I guess that's actually, in my view, kind of one of the issues, to be honest. I mean, I know we also work, with large corporates, and we have the same sort of issue, right? NDAs and not wanting to effectively share, I think, too much, about the details of the collaborations and the kind of results that they've gotten is in my view, is a little bit of a blocker, right? Of also allowing other parties, to come in. And of course, I understand the business side of it and the motivations, behind it. And I love that you actually picked an example as, Techstar with, the partners that you brought into the program, which I think is awesome because, it's really bringing, the best of both worlds, as you said, kind of taking down the knowledge of the industry to the startups, but on the other hand, helping the startups to be ready to actually engage with some of these large businesses, right? But I think, yeah, it's that sort of point of sharing. I mean, I'm talking about the partners in general, right?
Yep.
Of the food and beverage space. Given that they've been a bit too caught up, in my view, with how they have been developing, innovation internally and not wanting to share, of course, what they were working on. I feel even in the open innovation, mindset, they still kind of retain, a little bit of that. So that to me is kind of like the biggest, blocker for allowing actually a lot of other players actually to come into this space, because, they want to see, tangible results from also others. Yep. And sometimes, they just don't get the grip on actually what has occurred with that specific collaboration. But again, as you mentioned earlier, probably the focus needs to be on the learning journey, or at least how we define it, and not necessarily on the outcomes per se. Because as you said, even especially with technology, I guess it can be applicable for some stuff, but might not be applicable for some companies. So it really boils down to trying it and kind of being part of that game in the first place, isn't it?
Yeah, and you are starting to see some of those barriers come down, right? I mean, one of the things that we do is we actually connect all the different innovation teams that we work with at Techstars with each other. And so, Cargill and Ecolab with some of our other big corporate partners as well. So we try to facilitate some of those learnings, both within the food industry, but also like cross industry, right? And so, because you can take learnings from fintech, you can take learnings from retail, you can take learnings from other verticals where we have partners and apply them. I always say 80% of entrepreneurship transfers regardless of vertical, and I firmly believe that. And so the majority of it is, so you are starting to see some of those barriers come down. I mean, in our program, we have mentors from a lot of the other big major food enterprises, even though Cargill and Ecolab are our only sponsors. They're still super open to letting us have, a mentor come in from a General Mills or from a Schwann's or Synopta. And it's great. Like, I mean, that type of openness from them is phenomenal, and it's what's needed, right? I think they understand that, they can learn from others as well, and that's mutually beneficial in the long run to everybody.
Yep. That's fantastic. Thanks again, Brett, for sharing also, the challenges and how do you envision, these obstacles to be removed and already being removed, as we actually speak. Now we're going to touch on the topic also of the day in a way, which is COVID. Since COVID, things have been changing pretty rapidly, I guess, all over the world. Can you tell us a bit more about your view on what will be the impact that you think COVID will have on the food tech ecosystem? And what do you think companies large and small should do to actually embrace this time of uncertainty and change?
At the small side, we could, I've done things just on how you got to survive right now, right? So it's for a lot of startups, it's survival mode. And it kind of depends on what portion of the food system you're in. If you're food tech selling to restaurants or to food service, your business fell off a cliff. And so how do you survive? If you're a CPG company that sells primarily through retail, your business is booming right now. And so how do you take advantage of that? So I think at the small side, there's a lot of different opportunities and also challenges that you have in front of you. And so how do you survive? If you have the challenges, how do you survive long enough to come out of it? If you have opportunities, how do you make sure you take full advantage of the opportunities that are in front of you? I think that the really interesting thing that COVID has done, and in talking with some of the enterprises that I'm close to and people I'm close to in enterprises, I think that I think everybody prior to COVID was talking about we need to digitize, we need to get more efficient in supply chain and manufacturing and logistics. And so I think there was a general understanding of that in the food system. And what COVID has done is it has accelerated that, right? It has forced it not only in the faces of enterprise food, but also in the faces of the public, right? When you have reports about milk being just poured out on the ground, and you have reports of, literally hundreds and thousands of tons of food being just spoiling on the ground because they can't get because they're so used to going from point A to point B, and systems aren't in place to allow you to go from point A to point C instead in time. Food is uniquely challenging because it's not only a heavy item that you have to move, but it's also perishable. And so it's a unique challenge to food that a lot of other systems don't have. And so I think what COVID has done is it has demonstrated how inflexible a lot of our supply chain is. And it's not because companies don't want to be flexible. Like, none of these companies want food to waste, right? Like, everybody wants to be able to use it and deliver it. And I truly believe that they're trying to do the right things in almost all the cases. But the opportunity that's coming out of it is like, holy crap, like we need to do something about this. We need to fix this. And so what I think it's going to do is it's going to drive the adoption curve of innovation at enterprise food. And I think that will like kind of take two frames, right? One is enterprise adoption of innovation externally. So through partnerships with startups, I think that'll be easier to get pilots potentially, easier to get trial, and just, where big enterprises can say, yeah, let's give it a shot and see if it works. The relative cost of this pilot or, a year commercialization contract is relatively small relative to what we've seen over the last 3 months. And then I also think it'll drive internal innovation at these corporations and their desires and needs to do more internally. But in general, if you're familiar with the adoption curve, right, that's out there, it is going to accelerate that adoption curve, so shorten it, I think, for startups, which is a really positive thing coming out of this for companies, especially that are working in what I call the messy middle, right? Like that messy middle area. So basically post-harvest to retail. That area has just been exposed as being pretty inefficient right now. And so I think people recognize the need to innovate there.
So we're basically going to see laggards becoming early adopters, I guess, as well as we're going to, or maybe that's too big of a jump, but let's say.
Maybe not to early adopters, but like maybe it'll be the fast followers, right?
Fast followers,
but probably not early adopters.
Becoming early adopters, but basically we're going to see a shift in the adoption curve, which makes a lot of sense.
I think so.
As well as we're going to see a lot of, I guess, technologies and solutions that from the post-harvest to the retail basically being developed or being adopted by some of, I guess, the players that have been disrupted by also COVID, right? Because some of the biggest basically problems that COVID shed some light on have been actually also impacted, have actually impacted, the players that actually play in that space. Anything specific that you may want to kind of speculate on in terms of examples of things, from post-harvest to retail that you think, digitization or technology can really help, to solve?
Yeah, I think in the short run, there's a lot of opportunity to replace Microsoft Excel in the food system, and you see a lot of startups in that world. And I think that in the short run, that's really visible right now because as people are working from home, is like the addition of also having to work from home, it's harder to collaborate on spreadsheets, and a lot of shipping and transportation and the movement of items and certifications and all of these things are the information's passed in a lot of it on Excel still. And so I think that you'll see, there are a ton of like Trade Lanes is a really interesting company that's in the international shipping space that does a great job of it. There's a company called Otrify, which helps with certification management from different players within the food value chain. And these types of companies are coming after those use cases. And I think that you'll see the expedite of adoption of those types of technologies in the near term. And I think that not only the inefficiency of the messy middle, but also I'm working from home and that we need better collaboration tools on these types of things are really going to drive short-term adoption on those types of technology. Longer term, I think that one of the largest challenges facing the food system is labor and labor shortages, and this is something that was pre-COVID, certainly during COVID, with at the manufacturing facilities and having to shut them down, which are causing shortages especially in the protein space. It's exemplified that, but this was a long-term problem that we had coming to the food system even without COVID, and COVID again has shined a light on it. But this is a long-term place that I'm really interested in as an investor, as a place that innovators and startups should be thinking about. Is how do you either make labor more effective and efficient, the existing labor force more effective and efficient, because we already have shortages, we don't have enough people. How do you make it safer? So how do you make your employees' safety? So employee safety tools, employee efficiency tools, and then how do you automate? So again, we don't even have enough butts to fill the seats that we need right now today, and that pinch is only going to become greater and greater. So robotics, automation, tools like that can fill job needs that, are oftentimes really dangerous and difficult jobs that a lot of people don't want. And B, there are openings now that we can't fill in that space. And so I think those are three key things to be looking for in the employer labor space. And again, I think that's a huge challenge facing the food system.
Very true, very true. It's probably going to take a few years in order for also the big corporates, to embrace some of these solutions. But definitely, again, these are issues that have been highlighted by the global pandemic. And I think, as we now have experienced firsthand, what it actually means, also as consumers in a way, because, in supermarkets, you've seen shortages of products and all of that. I think, they will need to adopt some of these solutions, a lot faster than maybe they were planning to do, which, again, it kind of piggybacks on what you were just saying earlier, in terms of, just real examples of how the whole, space has been actually impacted by the global pandemic.
Yep.
This is great. Moving on more on the funding side of it, or the fund side of it, as you like. We've been hearing a lot about a few companies that actually have been able to raise, capital also during the global pandemic. And so even from our Food Data Navigator, which monitors, some of these funding activities, we were actually, positively impressed by their ability, to still raise capital. How do you envisage, in a post-COVID era, the funding space to change? And in particular, I'm interested in learning your view on how do you envisage corporate venturing to kind of develop, in this new scenario?
I don't know that it's going to change corporate venturing that much. I think that corporate venture arms have been on the rise for the last several years. I think that we will hit a peak probably in the next year or two of corporate venture arms. And then, honestly, some are going to decide that this wasn't working and wasn't for them, and you're going to see some shut down. And you'll see some continue on. And it has been, if you look historically at corporate venture arms, it's been fairly historical, right? Where you'll see a rise, then you'll see a fall, and a rise and a fall. And so we are in a rise period right now at the corporate venture side. One thing that's a bit different than prior peaks and valleys is I do think corporates are thinking a little bit earlier stage now than they have in the past, where a lot of times they would wait till Series B to really engage. Historically, they wanted you to be doing 10 million in revenue or 20 million in revenue prior to even talking to you. And a lot of these corporate venture arms are coming in at Series A rounds. It's still, if you're a Series C company, you're still probably way too early for a corporate venture arm. They have a hard time wrapping their heads around that early. But Series A tends to be where most of these venture arms are starting at now, which is a bit earlier than where they may have started historically. And so I think that's interesting. So I think that I actually don't think the corporate venture arm is going to be significantly affected by COVID in the food space, because one reason is a lot of these enterprises, even though they might have had a huge food service business that's getting hurt right now, their consumer product business or their ingredients business is exploding. And so I don't think you're going to have tremendously difficult issues like on the cap table side or on the balance sheet side. So so corporate venture, I don't know that will be significantly affected. On the venture fund side, you've also seen a tremendous rise in number of venture funds that talk about being willing to invest in food tech, in food technology. I think that when COVID first hit the United States, the general thought was, oh crap, doom and gloom, it's going to be incredibly difficult to raise venture capital. And I don't think that has panned out as much as I think a lot of people expected. There were certainly term sheets pulled. We had a portfolio company get a term sheet pulled right when it happened. And so there are certainly negative stories, and there are certainly examples of that happening. But I think that over the next 18 months, things will be a bit slower. I don't know. I think the best companies, I don't know that you'll have huge depressions in valuations come down. But these venture funds that were just recently built, they all have dry capital, and their job is to deploy that dry capital. And so they have to make these investments, and it is very unusual for an LP or limited partner of a fund to not make their capital contribution. So that money's going to be there most of the time. But I think what you might see is the ability of new fund creation goes down. So you're going to have less new funds built right now. And so once the current funds are deployed, in maybe 18 months, you actually might see a slowdown in capital deployments, more so than potentially in 2020. One of the other big things you hear from early stage funds, and one of the things I think about all the time is, if I invest today, is this company going to be able to have a valuation increase in the next 12 months? And so I think there's more concern around future financing risk, 12 months from now. And that's actually a bit more of what's slowing down investments today than the money's not there. It's more of what's the additional future financing risk for me as a venture fund. And if I wait 6 months to invest in this company, I'll have 6 months more of data, and will the valuation really increase? And so as a founder, it's your job to say, yeah, if you don't invest today, you're going to miss the boat, right? And make sure that they believe that.
Of course. That's great. So just to recap, I guess, corporates have historically been coming on board on some of these rounds actually a bit earlier. I mean, it used to be Series C. Now we might also see it Series A. On the other hand, I guess longer term, there might be less capital in the market because of the fluctuation, I guess, of also the demand, right? And the fact that valuation also might change quite rapidly after, I guess, we readjust, from the COVID-19.
Yeah, I think there was like a brief, oh no, what's happening phase at the beginning, and that's when term sheets got pulled. And then, funds are, people are closing rounds and funds are getting pitched all virtually now. But there's money flowing. We've made, in the last 3 months, my fund has made 4 investments. And so, stuff's getting closed.
Fantastic. And actually building on that, out of interest, how do you actually now do, and I'm talking to the Brett with the investor's hat now, how do you do due diligence, and how do you kind of overcome, those hurdles of not being able maybe to see the team in action in their office, or to really meet, in person the founders? Is there any tips that you can share with fellow investors on how you guys are doing that?
Lots and lots of Zoom meetings, right? You try and get to know the founders as best you can virtually. And so it is, in some ways it's funny. It's like, I would get on a plane and fly to a location in, we're an investor in a company called Hungary in DC, which is a great company. And, we'd get on, when we invest that, we got on a plane and flew to DC, right? And so in some ways, it's saving our travel budget and my time a little bit. So I could probably look at more pitches, but really spending the time and getting to know the founders is super important. I think on the founder side, it's even more important than ever to be great at following up, to be great at communicating, because some of the things you try and look for as an investor when you're meeting with them is, how well can you execute? How well do you interact with your employees? How well do you interact with your customers? And some of I think the things that I see as an investor that are good indicators of success in those areas are, again, like if I ask you a question and you're like, hey, I'm not sure, let me get back with you. How quickly do you do that? How communicative are you? When something happens new, good or bad, how quickly do you tell me about it? So I think that on the founder side, it's a bit on you to show how good you are at communicating, and that will help alleviate some of the stress investors might have around not being able to get to meet you in person.
That's fantastic, Brett. And being mindful of time and knowing that there might be some other questions at the end, I'm just going to ask you one final question, which is actually to your self as an entrepreneur, if there was one piece of practical advice that you would give to someone starting out their entrepreneurial journey in agri-food tech right now, but is also kind of like with your investors ahead, because again, you're wearing both. What would that be?
I mean, my favorite ones are, first surround yourself with great people, right? So if it's just, if it's just you, see if you can find a co-founder. Entrepreneurship is really hard. It's a journey. And having a co-founder on that journey with you can really make a huge difference. So find a co-founder that has complementary skill sets to your own and work with somebody else. I mean, again, like if you've never been through the entrepreneurial journey, it's really hard to explain. But it's a peaks and valleys, right? And it's an amazing, and you learn a ton, and I love it. I never thought I'd be an investor. I always thought I'd be running companies. I'm doing this by accident. But put some good people around you and your highs around you. And the other is, I got another one, which is iterate quickly. So don't think you have to spend $100,000 and build a huge thing and then go talk to customers. Try and sell something to a customer. If you have an idea, go try and sell it. Put a deck together and go try and sell it before you have it, and see what they say. I mean, it is, and then if you get good validation, market validation, then build it. Don't waste your money. Don't waste your time. Iterate and talk to customers as early as you possibly can in the process.
Fantastic. These are our gold nuggets as as an entrepreneur who has also jumped now, the fence and became an investor. I'm sure that you have experienced firsthand, some of these articles, but also you've seen a lot of people making mistakes, so that you've condensed.
I've wasted a lot of money on really stupid things that I thought were phenomenal without talking to customers. Like a lot of money.
A lot of money. Overbuilding, I guess, is one of the most common mistakes that a lot of entrepreneurs make. Fantastic. I'm now going to be opening up to questions, if we have any from the audience. We haven't received any, I guess, in the chat, but if there is anyone who wants to ask some questions to Brett, feel free to do that, both in the chat or by just unmuting yourself if you want to basically ask it. Otherwise, I also have actually a few others that I I wanted to fire at you, but I wanted to let everyone else actually to ask questions if they had any. I don't think we do, and nobody has raised their hands either. So I'm just going to ask you maybe one final question then, Brett, if you,
sure.
If I may. It is actually on food tech trends. Again, having seen, I guess, hundreds of thousands of decks, both as an investor and also as the head of the program, what do you think are the biggest trends that you currently see in food tech, and where do you see this trend? How do you see these trends to evolve in the future, both in terms of solutions as well as in disruptions in the market?
Yeah, and I think we've touched on a lot of these, right? So maybe I'll just kind of reiterate a few that one is the employee trend and labor shortage trend. That's a trend I'm really interested in that I don't think is talked about as much as maybe food safety or traceability. So that's one that I'm super interested in. I am a believer in the alternative protein space and think that will continue to grow and build. And I think that who are the support organizations that are coming up to sell to the alternative protein companies, not necessarily the brands themselves, but what are those technologies that are going to enable those alternative protein companies to be more efficient, to reduce prices, to sell more. I like to say, if you think about the gold rush, I don't want to invest in the gold miner. I want to invest in the pick company and the Levi's jean company, right? So who are those companies coming to the alternative protein space? I think that's super interesting, and there'll be a lot of interesting companies in that space over the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years. I mean, the digitization of food, which is really broad, but the digitization of food is what will eventually enable better practices around traceability and around food safety. And I don't know that you necessarily need blockchain to do it. Those pitches, you hit a peak about 2 years ago, and you're seeing fewer and fewer of those pitches because I think people realize that it was maybe a piece of the pie, puzzle, a few years down the line, but to get started, you don't probably really need it. So those are a couple that I find really interesting. And again, like I'm really interested in the middle, right? Like that supply chain piece of it. I think that's where a lot of innovation comes. If you look at on-farm technology adoption in the United States and some of the other large agricultural countries out there, there's been a ton of adoption of best practices and efficiency gains. And farmers, if there's an ROI, if there's a proven ROI, a farmer is going to adopt technology. That's been my experience with large enterprise farms. Where there's a tremendous opportunity to adopt technology is in developing countries. So you're talking like India, China, most of Africa, where you have tiny smallhold farms, really, really small, less than a hectare, right, of land. And they're literally oftentimes still using hand tools to plant and grow and harvest. And if we can get the technology that's already it's not even new stuff. It's like what's been adopted everywhere else. Like how do we get it into their hands so they can be more efficient? That in of itself will be a tremendous innovation. And so I think there's an incredible amount of opportunity to bring existing technology to farms and smallhold farms in a way that is efficient and would work for everybody. So that's another kind of interesting just space that I think of, like how will these smallhold farmers in developing nations and developing countries adopt technology over the next 5 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm. And this is great. And as you were mentioning some of these trends, one that actually popped to my mind as well was actually robotics, right? And I guess there I see also tremendous opportunities, but I also see on the other hand kind of some resistance, from farmers as they kind of feel that, robots are kind of replacing, their job. How do you see that kind of symbiotic, relationship to come to develop, in the future? And what do you think are the kind of easy wins, in making farmers understand that, it's not about replacing, but it's really about enabling them to become more efficient?
Yeah, I think one thing that'll drive adoption is just labor shortages, right? I mean, it's not even going to be replacing themselves, or it's going to be necessity because they just don't have enough people. And especially in the United States in the current labor environment, right? It is, it's almost a necessity to drive adoption in some cases. The robotics, as a startup, if you're a robotics startup, it is just such a long journey from V1, V2, V3, V4, and maybe V4 is the one that's actually ready for on-field trial. So I actually don't think farmers are hesitant to adopt robotic technology. I don't know if I agree with that. I think that they are, but in Earth's sense, you mentioned earlier, they're a company that's got adoption from farmers, right? They have robots, fully autonomous robots out in fields. And they're continuing to drive and grow. And so that's a good example of one that has received some adoption and seems to be going the right direction. But I think what will speed that adoption up is when the labor shortage and that pain. And I think you're going to see that not just on farm, but also in manufacturing facilities and then also at retail. So whether you're a restaurant or a grocery store, those labor issues, you're not immune to those either. And so I think that as technology is a bit more proven, it's more of how do you get those early adopters? Because I think there's plenty of fast followers and late adopters out there that want to see it, but they just want to see it work first. And so you just need to get those couple early adopters that will let you prove it, and then it'll go to mass market.
Yeah,
I think it's gonna I think it's inevitable personally.
I completely agree with you. I guess it's really about trying to accelerate. As you said. There's kind of early adopters to become, or the kind of laggers to become fast fast followers, and therefore kind of shortening all the shifts in the curve. Fantastic, Brett. I know you're really busy, so I'm gonna cut it off here. Thanks again, Brett, for your time. It's been truly fantastic to sharing with you some of the views about the future of agri-food tech and this whole relationship between corporates and startups, which I think is there to stay. So it's great to hear, all your learnings and share also some of ours. Thanks again for your time, and we will be in touch soon.
Thanks. Have a great rest of your day, y'all.
You too. Cheers. Bye-bye.